You sit there, phone in hand, your heart pounding as a cold sentence flashes across Instagram. Finally blocking my toxic sister, family is better without her. Just a few short words, yet they cut like a knife straight into your soul. Not from a stranger, but from your own brother, the one who once shared your childhood, who once stood by you in the rain. The feeling is a mix of pain and humiliation, knowing your private life has just been put on display before hundreds, maybe thousands, of eyes. People often say family is a safe harbor, but what happens when that very harbor becomes a place that casts you out? This isn't just the story of someone being publicly rejected by her brother. It's the journey of a heart searching for its own worth in the middle of deep wounds. And you will see that behind the pain lies a quiet strength, powerful enough to rewrite destiny. If you feel a connection to these raw truths about family, leave a gentle like and subscribe, and join me as we step into this story together. You can still see it now, as if the past were unfolding right in front of your eyes, a childhood, painted with both sunlight and shadow. There were days when you and your brother ran together down dusty village roads, your bare feet brushing against sharp little stones, but never slowing your laughter. Your laughter carried across the golden fields of rice, blending with the cicadas' endless chorus, creating a symphony of youth that felt eternal. At the end of those afternoons, your mother's voice would rise from the doorway, warm and familiar, calling you both home for dinner. The scent of rice steaming over a wood fire drifted into the air, mixing with the hum of evening, and in those moments, you believed family was the safest, most unshakable place in the world. But even the strongest walls can hide cracks. At first, they were too small for you to notice, but your young heart felt them long before your mind understood. Your brother was always the star, always the one bathed in light. When both of you misbehaved, your parents' voices softened for him, yet sharpened against you. When candy was divided, he received the sweeter half. When relatives gave gifts, he got the finest, the brightest, the best. You didn't rage, didn't protest. Instead, you tucked the feelings away deep inside, where they pooled like raindrops rippling across a quiet pond. And still, a question whispered in your heart. Am I nothing more than a shadow in this family? Is he the only light they want to see? Close quote. You buried that question, telling yourself, I'm loved too, just differently, more quietly. But you remember that one day, the day you brought home your certificate for academic excellence. Your small hands trembled with excitement. Your heart raced, picturing your parents' smiles, imagining them saying, we're proud of you. But that very same day, your brother had scored a goal in a local soccer match. The house lit up with cheers, with praise, with pride. They talked about his victory long into the evening, their voices glowing. Your certificate lay untouched on the table, shining faintly for a moment before fading into the shadows. You sat quietly in the corner, emotions swirling, a bittersweet cocktail of joy and ache. Joy, because you knew you had worked hard. Ache, because once again your achievement didn't seem enough to matter. You told yourself, if I just work harder, if I become better, one day they'll notice me. Yet that day felt distant, slipping away like a falling star burning out before you could even wish upon it. Have you ever felt that? That your efforts, no matter how sincere, no matter how hard won, were too small to catch the eyes of those you most wanted to notice? As the years rolled forward, the pattern deepened. At family gatherings, your parents boasted about your brother with glowing pride. He's going to make us proud. He's destined for success. And you were the quiet listener, spooning food into your bowl, smiling politely while emptiness filled your chest. You remember his birthdays. Tables heavy with food, laughter spilling into the night, relatives filling the house. And your birthdays. A small cake, a few candles flickering briefly, then darkness. It wasn't that you were forgotten, you weren't. But the difference was undeniable, and it carved deeper and deeper into your heart. More than once, you longed for a moment when your parents would turn to you, their eyes warm, and say, we're proud of you too. But those words never came. And so you learned silence. Silence at the dinner table. Silence in conversation. Silence so heavy it muffled even the voice of your own heart. But silence never meant you didn't feel. In truth, you felt everything, every glance of preference, every careless comparison, every selective embrace. Each one seeped into you like rain through the cracks of a wall. At first, the wall stood strong. But year by year, the cracks widened. You could feel it. One day, even the gentlest wind might make it all collapse. Slowly, you began to feel like a visitor in your own home. A guest familiar, but never truly belonging. The family photos on the wall told a story in silence. Your brother's radiant smile at the center, your own face often blurred at the edges, like a detail that didn't quite matter. And it hurt. It hurt to realize that the place meant to protect you, the family home, was also the place where you felt smallest, most invisible. Yet even through that ache, you held on to hope. Hope that one day, someone in your family would see your worth. Hope that love would mean more than a polished photo on the wall, that it would mean fairness, compassion, and balance. Through many summers, you carried that fragile hope. On long nights, you lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick, asking yourself, will tomorrow be different? Will I ever be recognized, or will I always remain in the shadows? Close quote. Maybe you, the one listening, know this feeling. Maybe you've lived through those moments of being overlooked. Maybe you've longed for a hug, a kind word, something to prove that you mattered. Do you remember a childhood moment when you felt not important enough? If so, you're not alone. And sometimes, simply naming that memory is the first step toward finding comfort. Because recognition isn't just about praise. It's about being seen, being known, being valued simply for existing. And when you weren't seen, you began to tell yourself stories in silence. You'd lie in bed and imagine another life, one where every child was loved equally, one where birthdays mattered no matter whose name was on the cake. You'd picture yourself standing on a stage, not for glory, but simply so your parents might finally notice you in the crowd. But day by day, you learned to survive without it. You learned to gather strength from within, to believe in yourself even when no one else did. And maybe that's what resilience really is. The quiet determination to hold on, even when the people you love most cannot see you. It's a heavy truth, isn't it? That sometimes, the hardest part of family isn't conflict, it's invisibility. It's being the silent one at the table while praise flows around you. And still, through it all, you carried love. Because no matter how much it hurt, a part of you always wanted to believe in the promise of family. That somehow, someday, they would turn, see you, and finally say, we're proud of you too. But until that day comes, if it ever comes, you stand here, telling your story, letting the world know that you exist, that you matter, that your truth deserves to be heard. So I ask you, listening now, do you see yourself in this story? Do you remember the sting of being overlooked? If you do, then you know how powerful it feels when someone finally listens. And if this story resonates with you, I invite you gently to press like or subscribe. Not as a demand, but as a quiet echo, a way of saying, I hear you. I understand. I've been there too. Because your presence here, your empathy, is the greatest encouragement to keep sharing. That night, the room was dark, lit only by the faint blue glow of your phone. You scrolled mindlessly, the way you often did, half looking at pictures, half skimming through meaningless captions. And then you stopped. Your eyes froze on a single line, short, cold, merciless. Finally, blocking my toxic sister family is better without her. The world stopped. The fan kept spinning above you, the clock on the wall ticked on, but inside, everything collapsed into silence. Your heart clenched. Your hands shook so hard you nearly dropped the phone. Each word burrowed deep, repeating like a hammer striking steel. Toxic, better without her. This wasn't a joke. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a declaration, written with intent, thrown into the public square for everyone to see. And worst of all, it came from your brother. The same brother who once held your hand down dusty roads, who once whispered secrets to you in the dark. In an instant, every story you told yourself that you were loved, even if it was quieter, even if it was less shattered. This wasn't quiet favoritism whispered in your parents' eyes. This wasn't subtle neglect hidden between family dinners. This was a public rejection. A sentence carved into stone for the world to witness. You read the line again, hoping you were mistaken. But it was still there, sharp as glass. You scrolled down, praying for context, for some hint of humor, some wink that would soften the blow. But there was nothing. Just the words, standing alone, like a tombstone. No tears came. They had dried up years ago. What fooled you instead was numbness, a chilling emptiness that spread from your chest outward. You sat motionless, the silence of the room so heavy you could hear your heartbeat echo. And then came a storm of questions. What did I do wrong? When did I become toxic in his eyes? Was my presence nothing more than a burden all along? Close quote. Your mind flung you back to childhood, to the nights you and your brother ran through the rain, splashing through puddles until you laughed so hard you couldn't breathe. To the evenings when the two of you sat side by side, he reading while you scribbled in your notebook. To the long blackouts when you lit candles, whispered ghost stories, and then burst into giggles out of fear. Those memories replayed like film reels. And then, like film burning in a projector, they dissolved into ash, replaced by the harsh words glowing on the screen. What cut deepest wasn't just the label toxic. It was the exposure. You knew social media was no diary. It was a stage. And now, you stood on that stage, not by choice but by force, with hundreds, maybe thousands of eyes watching. They didn't see you as a person anymore. They saw you as the sister better left behind. Imagine it. Imagine the shame of your dignity being stripped bare and cast into the public arena. You weren't just losing your place in your family, you were losing your place in the world. Friends could read it. Colleagues could read it. Strangers could read it. And every one of them would wonder, what did she do to deserve this? Close quote. Your phone buzzed. Messages appeared. Hey, what happened? Why would your brother post that? Close quote. You stared at the words, unable to answer. How could you? How do you defend yourself when the person who knows your history best has already delivered the verdict against you? It felt like standing under a spotlight, stripped down, unable to hide. That night, sleep never came. Every time you closed your eyes, the words returned, etched in fire. Better without her. You pressed your face into the pillow, but the words echoed in your mind, an endless loop. You wished you could vanish, if only to silence them. Morning came, but nothing felt the same. You walked outside, feeling as though every eye was on you. Maybe it was just your imagination, but every glance, every whisper on the street felt sharp, like salt rubbed into an open wound. And in that silence, you realized something. Betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's only a single sentence, short and brutal, that destroys an entire part of your life. Yet somewhere, beneath the rubble of your heart, a faint sound stirred. A voice, quiet but steady. Does your worth really depend on their eyes? Can you exist without their approval? Close quote. At first, it seemed absurd. How could you measure your worth outside of family? But the voice lingered. It grew louder, bolder, until it planted something inside you, a seed. Maybe this was the moment of awakening. Maybe being cast out was the only way to discover that the ground beneath you had always been your own. You began to understand. Sometimes the moment that breaks you is also the moment that opens a door. A door to growth, to courage, to finally living for yourself instead of for someone else's approval. And so, in the raw pain of that rejection, you felt something unexpected resolve. It didn't erase the hurt, but it whispered of possibility, of change. Have you ever felt that? A moment so painful you thought it would destroy you, only to discover it was also the beginning of something new. If you have, then you know the strange power of such moments. And if this story resonates with you, I invite you to leave a like or subscribe. Not as noise, not as obligation, but as a quiet gesture, a way of saying, I've been there too. I understand. Because sometimes, even the smallest echo of empathy can soothe a heart that's bleeding. And sometimes, that echo is what gives a story like this the strength to go on. You once thought nothing could hurt more than that Instagram post. But life has a way of proving you wrong. Words posted online can spread like fire, but facing those words in real life, hearing the laughter, seeing the glances, feeling the weight of judgment cuts far deeper. That day, you arrived at a large family gathering. On the surface, it was supposed to be a celebration, a time to reconnect. Yet the moment you stepped inside, the air felt heavy. Conversations buzzed, laughter rose and fell, dishes clattered in the kitchen. But beneath it all, you sensed the shift. Eyes turned toward you not with warmth, but with curiosity, amusement, and something harsher you didn't want to name. You chose a seat in the corner, trying to disappear. But invisibility doesn't work when whispers follow you like shadows. Isn't she the one he called toxic? Close quote. If her own brother said it, then it must be true. The words weren't shouted, but they didn't have to be. Each syllable pierced you. You sat stiff, your fingers curling into fists beneath the table. And then it came. A relative leaned back in his chair, grinning. Oh, you actually showed up. I thought you'd been erased from the family already. Laughter erupted around the table. Loud, careless, merciless. It wasn't just noise, it was knives. You forced a smile, though your lips trembled. Your nails dug into your palms until they ached. You wanted to vanish, to walk out, but your body betrayed you. You sat frozen, as if pinned to the chair. Across the table, your brother sat calm, unmoved. No attempt to soften the blow, no discomfort, no flicker of regret. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He had already spoken to the world. The humiliation burned deeper because of that silence. Faces you had known since childhood, faces that once called you sweet, close quote, kind, close quote, the good daughter, now looked at you with something else. Pity mixed with contempt. You could almost hear the unspoken words. Maybe he was right about her. And then, the final cut. A child's voice. Your cousin, wide-eyed, innocent. Is it true, what he wrote? Are you really like that? Close quote. You froze. Children don't know how to lie. They say what they believe. And in that moment, you realized even a child had accepted your brother's story as truth. You opened your mouth, but no words came. Your throat constricted, your breath caught. Silence pressed down on you like a verdict. And to the people around you, silence was confirmation. Have you ever been there? Have you ever wanted to scream your truth, but found yourself too crushed to speak, and in that silence felt condemned by everyone's eyes? The rest of the gathering blurred into pain. Every laugh rang like a hammer. Every glance felt like a knife. You tried to smile, tried to hold yourself upright, but your eyes betrayed you. They burned, filled with tears you refused to shed. When it ended, you left quickly, slipping into the night. Outside, the road stretched dark and empty. Leaves scattered under your feet, caught in the cold wind. The trees stood tall, silent witnesses to your humiliation. You walked slowly, your heart heavy with questions. How did family become a place where I am shamed? How did the brother who once called me his little sister turn me into a public joke? Close quote. Memories crowded in, memories you hadn't asked for. Childhood nights when you and your brother waited together for your mother to come home. Afternoons when you shared food, even laughter. Small, ordinary moments that once made you believe blood ties were unbreakable. Now, they clash violently with the present, the same brother sitting still, watching as others mocked you. The distance between then and now was not measured in years, but in an abyss you could never cross. That day, you learned something bitter. Public humiliation steals more than dignity. It takes away hope, the fragile hope that you still belong, that family might someday make space for you again. It brands you as an outsider, even in the home that once promised safety. But amid the wreckage, another thought rose. When others drag you down, you have two choices. Accept their definition of you, or create your own. You lifted your eyes to the night sky. Above the black, a single star flickered faintly. Maybe I don't shine for them, close quote, you thought. But that doesn't mean I don't have my own light. It was a small thought, fragile as a candle. But even a candle glows in darkness. And that's when you felt the first stirrings of resolve. If they saw you as worthless, so be it. Their words couldn't define you forever. You would find your strength, not in their approval, but in your own truth. You, the one listening, have you ever been mocked in front of others? Have you ever been turned into a punchline, your dignity stripped for entertainment? And did you discover, in that same moment, the seed of your own strength? If you did, you know this. Humiliation wounds, yes. But it also reveals. It shows you who you are when the laughter fades. It tests whether you will stay broken or rise. And if this story resonates with you, I invite you, gently, to press like or subscribe. Not for me. For yourself. As a reminder. I was humiliated, but I was not destroyed. I stood up again. And I am still walking forward. Because sometimes, even the smallest gesture, even a click, even a nod of understanding can be the spark that keeps a hurting heart alive. The door shut behind you, and silence rushed in like a tide. Outside, the world still bustled with noise and chatter, but here, inside your room, there was nothing but the sound of your own breathing. The phone lay on the table, screen black, yet in your mind the words still glowed, sharp and merciless, carved into your memory as if by fire. Finally blocking my toxic sister, family is better without her. And after those words came the echo of laughter from the family gathering, the innocent question of your little cousin, the indifferent gaze of your brother. All of it swirled together, replaying over and over, like a piece of music you could not turn off, dark, discordant, endless. You sat on the edge of your bed, burying your face in your hands. Everything inside you spun. Part of you wanted to scream, to shatter the silence, to cry out that you were not what they claimed. Yet another voice, softer but insidious, whispered, maybe they're right. Maybe you're not good enough. That was when you understood. The fiercest battles are not fought out there, in the open. They are fought in the quiet corners of your own heart. The war inside you had begun. Memories rose like ghosts. You saw yourself as a child, clutching your certificate of achievement while no one noticed. You remembered birthdays with a single candle, while your brother's parties overflowed with guests, food, and gifts. You remembered trying again and again, desperate to prove your worth. And what had it led to? A post that dismissed you publicly. A gathering that turned you into a joke. You asked yourself, trembling, did any of it matter? Were all my efforts just a lie I told myself? Close quote. Fear crept in, shadow after shadow. Fear that your name was now ruined. Fear that friends and colleagues would believe his words. Fear that every look you received from this day forward would carry the same question. Is she really that kind of person? Close quote. You walked toward the mirror. The reflection staring back at you felt almost like a stranger. Hollow eyes, drawn face, weighed down by years of unspoken hurt. And a question slipped out. Who am I, if not the rejected one? Close quote. Tears came hot and fast. You hadn't wanted them, but they had waited for years of holding it together, of pretending you didn't notice the favoritism, the dismissals, the way you were always second best. They poured down now, not just for tonight, but for every wound you had carried alone. Inside your mind, two voices clashed. One hissed, you're worthless. They've always been right about you. The other pushed back. No. You tried. You worked hard. You lived with honesty. Mistakes don't erase your worth. The battle dragged on, exhausting you. You felt pulled between two cliffs. Despair on one side, fragile hope on the other. And then, childhood memories returned. You saw your brother once protecting you, splitting a piece of bread, comforting you when you cried. But that image was shattered by the present, his cold silence, watching as others laughed at you. You asked yourself bitterly, where did that brother go? Or was he never truly there? Close quote. You felt torn, half of you still longing for love, half of you already accepting that love had vanished. But then another question came, sharper than the rest. Not why don't they love me? Close quote, but why have I let the love or lack of it define me for so long? Close quote. That question stunned you. For years, your worth had depended entirely on the nod of approval from your family. But what if that nod never came? Would you keep living in emptiness forever? You sat quietly, breathing deeply. And in that moment, you began to realize, maybe it was time to stop waiting. Stop waiting for validation from people who might never give it. Maybe it was time to learn to validate yourself. It wasn't an easy thought. The pain still clung to you, chains of memory pulling you back. The whispers of doubt still rose, demanding you collapse. But beneath it all, a truth emerged. You still had a choice to define who you were. You moved to the window and pushed it open. The night air rushed in, cool against your skin. Outside, the garden stirred with the scent of leaves, and above, the sky stretched wide, scattered with stars. Your eyes found a single star, small, faint, yet persistent. You whispered to yourself, maybe I don't shine bright in their eyes, but this light is mine, and it is enough. For the first time in what felt like forever, you smiled. A real smile, not the broken mask you had worn at the table. The pain hadn't vanished, but something inside you shifted. You realized you could rebuild, that your story wasn't over. You, the one listening now, have you ever faced such a battle inside yourself? A night where the darkness within seemed louder than the world outside. A moment where you asked, am I enough? Do I deserve to be loved? Close quote. If you have, you know the struggle isn't easy. But you also know it's the first step toward reclaiming yourself. Because the truth is, worth is not a gift others can hand you. Worth is something you decide to carry, even when others throw stones at you. And if this story has stirred something in you, I ask gently, leave a like or subscribe. Not as routine, not for me, but as a quiet promise to yourself. I will not let anyone else define me. I will write my own story. Sometimes, even the smallest gesture, a click, a nod, a whisper of agreement can be the foundation we stand on. A reminder that no matter how loud the doubts may be, we are never entirely alone in our battles. For weeks, you had lived inside a storm of silence. You thought you had grown used to it, that if you stayed quiet long enough, if you buried the pain deep enough, it might lose its sting. But silence is never endless. There always comes a moment when the heart can hold no more, when the smallest thing tips the balance. And when that moment arrives, the heart does not simply break. It explodes. That morning began like any other, at least on the surface. Sunlight filtered timidly through the worn curtains, casting a pale stripe of gold across the floorboards of your room. The air was still, but your body carried the weight of another restless night. You had tossed and turned for hours, haunted by fragments of memory and echoing words that refused to quiet down. When you finally rose, your face was pale, your eyes ringed with shadows that told their own story of exhaustion. You pulled on an old jacket, its fabric softened by years of wear, and stepped outside. The city greeted you with its usual buzz. Horns blared impatiently, vendors shouted their prices into the morning air, footsteps scattered across the pavement as people hurried to jobs, schools, errands. Yet to you, it all felt strangely muted, like watching life unfold behind a pane of glass. The world carried on with its rhythm, but you walked as though the beat no longer belonged to you. At work, the day unfolded in a pattern you knew too well. People exchanged greetings, keyboards clattered like steady rain, phones rang with endless demands. For a few hours, you managed to slip into the current, pretending you were part of it. You answered emails, nodded in conversations, forced small smiles. But beneath the motions, your heart was a drum of dread. And then, at lunch, the words came. I heard about that post. Must be rough, having family drama out in the open like that. The voice was casual, light, almost sympathetic. The words weren't sharpened like knives, but they still cut. What hurt wasn't the tone, it was the smile that followed, a smile laced with curiosity, and the silent glances from others who turned toward you, eyes full of questions they didn't dare voice. That was all it took. One careless sentence, one ripple in the still water, and everything inside you began to unravel. You forced a laugh, nodding faintly as though it didn't matter. You turned back to your food, pretending to be distracted. But inside, a crack spread wide through your chest. All the walls you had built so carefully in the past weeks buckled under the weight of that moment. The rest of the day passed in a haze. You worked mechanically, hands moving without intention. Letters swam on the screen, sentences dissolved before you could read them. Numbers blurred together until they no longer meant anything. You stared, but your mind was elsewhere, caught in a loop, gnawed at by the same question over and over. Am I really who they say I am? Is that all I'll ever be? Close quote. By evening, the exhaustion was heavier than your body could carry. You walked home slowly, as though every step dragged chains behind you. Outside, the streets glowed under amber streetlights, their halos breaking across wet pavement. Couples passed by laughing, groups chattered loudly, and yet all of it slipped by you like shadows. When you reached your room, the air inside felt thick, dense with unspoken words. You closed the door and stood still, gripping the handle as though bracing yourself against a storm. For weeks, you had bottled it all up. For weeks, you told yourself to be strong, to endure, to keep moving. But tonight, you knew you couldn't keep it inside anymore. You crossed to the drawer and opened it slowly. There, buried under papers and forgotten objects, was an old notebook. Its cover was frayed, corners bent, and its pages, and then came the breaking. It wasn't the quiet tears you had shed countless nights before, muffled into pillows, hidden away. This time, it was different, loud, raw, shaking you from the inside out. You wept with a force that startled even yourself. They were not only tears for the present, but tears for years of silence, for every wound carried in secret. You cried for the child who tried so hard, for the teenager who always fell short, for the adult who still bore scars unseen by anyone else. The sound filled the room. It was unguarded, stripped of pride or control. And it was not weakness. It was release. It was the sound of chains snapping after years of restraint. You cried until your body trembled, until your chest burned, until no more tears would come. And in that hollow exhaustion, something new appeared. A strange clarity, like a faint light flickering in the dark. A thought whispered inside. If I keep letting them define me, I will never be free. I will remain forever the one they rejected. The breaking point, you realized, was not the end. It was the beginning of awakening. With trembling hands, you wiped your face and stood. You turned to the mirror, bracing yourself. The reflection staring back was still weary, still red-eyed, but in those eyes was something unfamiliar, a glint, faint but undeniable. You touched the glass gently, as though reaching for a friend, and murmured, I don't need to be anyone else to be worthy. I just need to be me. The next morning, you stepped out the door once more. The world was unchanged, traffic snarled, voices rose and fell, life hurried on. But something inside you had shifted. You no longer flinched under glances. You no longer let careless words pierce your soul. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer a chain. It had become fuel. Not the weight dragging you down, but the fire that would carry you forward. That was the paradox of the breaking point. In losing the illusion, you found truth. In being shattered, you discovered strength. Have you ever felt that, listener? That single instant when everything collapses, when one phrase, one gesture, one tiny event makes all the walls you spent years building around yourself crumble like fragile glass. And in the ruins, you discover something you never expected, a voice that had always been yours, waiting to be heard. If you have, then you know. Sometimes we must break to finally see clearly. Sometimes the fire must burn away everything old before we can step out of the ashes. The breaking point is not a period. It is a comma. A pause, a breath, before the next chapter begins. And that night, as you lay in bed, drained yet strangely lighter, you understood something vital. Though the pain was real, so was your choice. You could remain the abandoned one, forever defined by rejection, or you could become the author of your own story. For so long, you had told yourself you'd mastered silence. You convinced yourself that if you kept everything buried, if you simply endured one more day, the ache would dull and eventually fade. But silence is fragile. It is like a thin glass vase, holding far too much water. There is always a final drop that tips the balance, always a moment when the weight of everything you've carried overflows. And when that moment arrives, the heart does not simply fracture, it erupts. That morning began like countless others. Pale light spilled through the curtains, painting faint golden stripes across the walls of your room. You sat up slowly after another night of restless tossing, your limbs heavy, your spirit drained. The silence in the room felt almost too loud, as though it carried every thought you had tried to push away. You pulled on an old jacket, its fabric worn thin at the elbows, and stepped outside into the world. The city, as always, was alive. Cars honked impatiently, vendors shouted out their daily prices, and strangers hurried past, clutching bags and briefcases, each lost in their own lives. Yet to you, all of it felt distant, blurred, as though you were moving underwater. Every sound was muffled, every sight dulled. You walked as though the earth itself had shifted beneath you, as though you were drifting through a life that no longer recognized you. At work, the rhythm of the day unfolded with its usual predictability. Greetings were exchanged, keyboards clicked steadily like rain on a roof, phones rang with urgent demands. For a brief time, you allowed yourself to slip into the routine, to imagine that you could move through the hours unnoticed. But during a break, someone said it. I heard about that post, must be tough, having your family call you out like that. The words weren't laced with cruelty. They weren't even meant as a direct attack. They were tossed lightly, as if they were nothing but conversation. Yet the smile that followed held a trace of curiosity, and suddenly, you felt it, the weight of every pair of eyes in the room turning toward you, silent but watching. That was all it took. A single spark against dry tinder. You forced a light laugh, nodded faintly, and turned away, pretending it didn't matter. but your heart recoiled. Inside, something cracked open. All the restraint, all the careful efforts to appear composed, slipped away in an instant. The rest of the day blurred into a haze. You moved through tasks mechanically, your fingers typing words you could barely see, your eyes staring at letters that refused to stay still. Numbers and shapes dissolved into static, into meaningless fragments. And through it all, one thought echoed endlessly, gnawing at you like a shadow. Am I really the person they say I am? Is this who I've always been in their eyes? Close quote. By the time evening arrived, you returned home carrying more than exhaustion. You carried the weight of years. The streets outside glowed under amber lamps, the light falling in broken patches across the pavement. Couples walked past, laughing softly. Children tugged at their parents' hands. But you felt detached from it all, like a ghost moving through someone else's world. Inside your room, the air pressed heavy against your chest. You closed the door behind you and leaned against it, trembling, as though bracing for a storm you could no longer hold back. For weeks, you had swallowed every scream, buried every tear, silenced every question. But tonight, you knew you could not contain it any longer. You moved toward the drawer and opened it slowly, almost reverently. There, under forgotten scraps of paper, lay an old notebook. Its cover was scuffed, the edges bent, the pages yellowed with age. Your fingers shook as you flipped it open, and there they were, fragments of the child you once were. Words written in crooked, uneven lines, yet alive with hope. I want to study hard so my parents will be proud. I want to succeed so my brother will look up to me. I want us all to be happy together. The handwriting was clumsy, but the dreams were pure. And as you read them, the tears came. Not slowly, not gently, but suddenly flooding your eyes until the words blurred into rivers of ink. Those dreams had been simple. You had never asked for riches. You had never wanted glory. All you had ever longed for was belonging, to feel loved by the people who should have been your unshakable foundation. And yet, even that had been denied. Not by strangers. Not by a cold, distant world. But by your own blood. You pressed the notebook to your chest, clutching it as though you could hold on to that younger version of yourself. Through your sobs, you whispered, "Why? Why me? Why did my own family turn me into something to mock?" Close quote. And in that moment, the breaking came. Tears blurred your vision. The dreams of your younger self had been so simple, so pure. You never asked for riches. You never demanded anything extraordinary. All you ever wanted was belonging. And yet, even that had been denied. Not by strangers. Not by the outside world. But by your own blood. You clutched the notebook to your chest and whispered, "Why? Why me? Why would they turn me into something to laugh at?" Close quote. And then, the breaking came. It was not a quiet sadness. It was not the muted tears you had shed in secret before. It was raw, full-bodied, uncontrollable sobbing that shook you from the inside out. You cried for the child who never felt enough, for the teenager who lived in constant comparison, for the adult who still carried wounds that no one else cared to see. That sound filled the room. It was not weakness, it was the voice of release. It was the voice of truth that could no longer be silenced. You wept until your body trembled, until your chest ached, until no more tears would come. And in the stillness that followed, you heard something else, something quiet, yet firm. A whisper. If you continue letting them define you, you will never escape. You will remain forever the rejected one. And that realization, painful as it was, became a seed of clarity. The breaking point was not an end, it was the beginning of awakening. You wiped your swollen face and rose slowly. In the mirror, you still saw tired eyes and red skin, but there was a flicker there, a spark. You reached out to the reflection and whispered, "I don't need to become anyone else to be worthy. I only need to be myself." The next day, you walked out, the door changed. The world outside had not shifted, cars still honked, people still rushed, routines still pressed forward, but you had shifted. You no longer flinched when others glanced at you. You no longer let careless remarks pierce the deepest part of you. The pain had not disappeared, but it had become something else. Not a chain, but a flame. Not an anchor, but fuel. That was the paradox of breaking. In collapse, there is clarity. In being shattered, there is strength. You, the one listening now, have you ever reached that place? That single moment when everything you've built inside yourself crumbles. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but quietly, through one careless laugh, one dismissive glance, one word that seems harmless to others yet tears through you like glass. Suddenly, all the walls you spent years building collapse, and for the first time, you hear your own voice echoing from beneath the rubble. If you have, then you know. Sometimes breaking is necessary. Sometimes we must be stripped bare, torn down to the core, before we discover who we truly are beneath the weight of expectations. Sometimes the fire must consume everything familiar before something new can rise. The breaking point is not a period. It is not the end. It is a comma, a pause, a breath, before the story continues. And that night, lying in your bed, your chest still aching but strangely lighter, you understood a truth that would not leave you. Though pain is real, so is choice. You could remain forever defined by rejection, or you could begin the harder, braver work of becoming the author of your own story. For weeks, you had carried silence like a heavy stone, pressing against your ribs, weighing down your days. You told yourself you had grown used to it, that if you swallowed pain long enough, if you simply endured one more day, you would outlast it. But silence is never infinite. The heart is not a bottomless vessel. There is always a final drop, a moment when the smallest gesture tips the balance and the dam bursts. And when that moment arrives, the heart doesn't merely bend, it breaks wide open. That morning began like any other, though you did not yet know how quickly it would unravel. Sunlight streamed faintly through the curtains, painting thin lines of gold across the floor. You woke from another restless night, your body stiff, your eyes shadowed by exhaustion. Pulling on the same worn jacket, you stepped outside into a world that seemed to move without you. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm, vendors shouting from the corners, car horns blaring impatiently, strangers weaving past one another. Yet to you, it all felt strangely distant. The noise was muffled, as though you were walking behind glass. You moved among them, but it was as if you belonged nowhere at all. At work, the hours passed in their ordinary cadence. Greetings exchanged, keyboards clicking, phones ringing. For a time, you convinced yourself you were safe within that routine. You blended in, invisible in your tasks, hidden in plain sight. Perhaps, you thought, today no one would mention it. But then came the break. During a pause, when voices gathered casually, it slipped out. I heard about that post. Must be tough, having your family call you out like that. The words weren't spat with venom. They weren't even intended as cruel. But they landed like a stone cast into still water, sending waves through you that you could not contain. A faint smile followed, accompanied by a glance too curious, too knowing. And in that instant, you forced a laugh, nodded faintly, and turned away. Outwardly, the conversation ended. But inside, something long fragile cracked apart. The rest of the day blurred into fog. You typed, you nodded, you played the part of someone unaffected. Yet the words echoed relentlessly in your mind. The post, the laughter at the gathering, your brother's silence. They circled back, reopening wounds you thought you had stitched closed. Over and over, the same question rose like a haunting refrain. Am I truly what they say I am? Has that been who I was all along? Close quote. By the time evening fell, the weight was unbearable. The amber glow of streetlights stretched across the pavement in broken patterns. Your room, once familiar, now felt suffocating, the air pressing heavily against your lungs. You shut the door behind you and leaned against it, trembling as though you were holding back an invisible flood. And then, at last, the silence shattered. The breaking came. Not the quiet weeping you had allowed yourself before, muffled into pillows so no one would hear. This time it was raw, unrestrained. Sobs all through you, fierce and guttural, as though years of grief had finally demanded to be heard. You cry for the child who only ever wanted to belong. You cry for the teenager who tried endlessly, always compared, never enough. You cry for the adult who carried invisible scars, unseen yet aching every day. And in that breaking, painful though it was, a seed was planted. For collapse does not mean ruin. In the ashes of breaking, you discovered the first breath of clarity. And in that breath was strength. The words weren't laced with cruelty, not even with deliberate malice. They were tossed so casually, like a pebble thrown into a still pond, almost careless in delivery. And yet, those words did not vanish on impact. They rippled outward, spreading further and further until the whole of you seemed to tremble beneath their weight. A light smile followed, as if nothing significant had been said, but the eyes that flicked toward you carried something sharper than malice. Curiosity. And that alone was enough. You forced a laugh that sounded strange even to your own ears, nodded faintly to disguise the sting, and turned away. Outwardly, the moment passed without incident. Inwardly, however, something delicate and long-fractured finally cracked deeper. The rest of the day blurred together. You moved through the motions of life, typing at your desk, offering nods at the right times, smiling when politeness required it. But beneath that thin performance, the words returned again and again, circling you like vultures. The memory of the post, the echo of laughter at the gathering, your brother's silence, it all wove together, striking at an old wound. Over and over, the question beat against you like a relentless drum. Am I truly what they say I am? Has that been who I was all along? Close quote. By the time you reached home, the weight had become unbearable. Streetlights cast their amber glow across the pavement, their fractured light scattering like broken glass. The night was alive with ordinary sounds, distant traffic, voices drifting faintly through the air, but to you, everything felt muffled, heavy, almost suffocating. You stepped into your room and shut the door firmly behind you, leaning against it, as though the act might hold back the storm rising within. For weeks you had restrained yourself, stitching silence over every wound, forcing composure, swallowing bitterness. Tonight, all of it surged upward, demanding release. 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 All of it surged. Your eyes fell to a drawer you hadn't opened in years. You pulled it open with trembling hands and reached for an old notebook. The cover was frayed, the corners bent, the once white pages faded to yellow. Still, as you flipped through the uneven handwriting, fragments of the child you once were looked back at you. I want to make my parents proud. I want my brother to smile at me. I want us all to be happy together. The letters were clumsy, hopeful, written by small hands that believed in simplicity. Tears blurred the ink before your eyes. That child had not wished for riches, had not dreamed of crowns or glory. The wish was achingly small. Belonging. To be loved by the people who were supposed to be home. But even that, the most human of wishes, had been denied. Not by strangers, not by the harshness of the outside world, but by those whose names you had carried as your own. By your own blood. The tears began before you could stop them. You pressed the notebook to your chest as if the pages could hold you together, whispering to the empty room, why? Why me? Why would they turn me into something to laugh at? Close quote. And then it happened, the breaking. It was not the quiet weeping of nights before, muffled into pillows so no one would hear. It was raw, unrestrained, the kind of sobs that racked the entire body. The sound tore from you like storms crashing against cliffs, primal and unstoppable. You cried until your chest ached, until your voice was nothing but a rasp, until the walls around you carried the echoes of years you had tried to silence. You wept for the child who had never felt enough, who had written those innocent words in a notebook believing they could come true. You wept for the teenager who had tried endlessly, studying harder, working longer, smiling wider, only to be compared, dismissed, overlooked. You wept for the adult who now carried invisible scars, scars no one ever acknowledged, scars that bled anew at the faintest touch. Every version of you, every stage of your life, seemed to gather in that room, finally demanding to be mourned. The grief was not for one moment, but for a lifetime of small cuts, of tiny abandonments, of being unseen. Yet within the storm, something stirred. The breaking was terrible, but it was also honest. And in that brutal honesty lay the first glimmer of freedom. The sound filled the room. It was not weakness. It was release. A dam that had been holding for years finally burst open. All the silence you had carried tight in your chest, pressed into your bones, cracked apart in that moment. You wept until your body shook uncontrollably, until your throat burned raw, until no tears were left to give. It felt endless, but when it was over, the stillness was almost louder than the sobs. And in that hollow silence, something surfaced. A whisper, quiet but firm, rising from deep within. If you let them define you, you will remain forever the rejected one. That thought pierced sharper than any insult you had ever endured. It frightened you with its truth, but it also clarified everything. For suddenly you understood. The breaking point wasn't the end. It was the beginning of awakening. You stumbled toward the mirror. What you saw was raw, swollen eyes, trembling lips, a face marked by grief. Yet in those weary eyes was something fragile but undeniable. A spark. You touched the cool glass as if to reassure yourself you were real. And you whispered, I don't need to be anyone else to deserve worth. I only need to be me. That sentence became an anchor. It repeated in your mind like a steady pulse. You carried it into the next day, when you opened the door and stepped outside. The world hadn't changed. Traffic still roared, voices clashed, people hurried past with blank expressions. But within you, a subtle shift had occurred. You no longer shrank beneath the weight of passing glances. Casual remarks still stung, but they no longer sliced as deep. The pain remained. It did not vanish overnight, but it had changed shape. It was no longer a chain binding you down. It had become a flame, flickering but steady, burning within, lighting the road ahead. That is the paradox of breaking. Collapse does not mean ruin. Sometimes, in the ashes, you find the purest clarity. Sometimes, in the fracture, you discover the very strength you thought you lacked. Have you listening now ever known that moment? When everything you built to protect yourself comes crashing down. When one phrase, one look, one laugh tears apart every defense. And though it feels unbearable, in the ruins, for the very first time, you hear your own true voice. If you have, then you know. Breaking is not destruction. It is transformation. Sometimes we need to fall apart in order to see ourselves clearly. Sometimes everything must burn to the ground before we understand that we were never beyond repair. Sometimes the fire must consume the old before something new, raw, and true can rise. The breaking point, then, is not a period. It is not the end of your story. It is a comma. a pause, a breath, a space between what was and what will be. It is the threshold between collapse and rebirth. And as days turned into weeks, you carried this new awareness with you. Each morning, as you faced your reflection, you no longer saw only what had been lost. You saw what was being built. Each scar, once unbearable, now appeared as proof you had endured. Each memory, once suffocating, became a reminder of what you had survived. You began to see breaking not as shame, but as proof of courage. Because to break is to feel deeply, to risk loving, to risk living. To break is to be human. And to rise after breaking, that is to be free. So, the next time you hear the sound of your own walls crumbling, remember, it is not the end. It is the call of awakening. It is your spirit refusing to be silenced any longer. And maybe, just maybe, it is the beginning of your strongest chapter yet. And that night, lying in your bed, exhausted but strangely lighter, you understood something that had taken years to reach. Though pain is real, so is choice. Though scars remain, so does freedom. You realized you could stay in the role they had written for you, the one who was left out, overlooked, rejected. Or you could take the pen back and begin writing your own story. That realization marked the beginning of a new stage. Growth. But it did not come like a thunderclap. It did not descend in one triumphant moment of clarity. Growth was quieter than that, almost imperceptible, like a river flowing through stone. Day after day, drop after drop, the water smoothed the rough edges, softened the sharpness, and transformed jagged rocks into rounded shapes of calm. For you, growth was no longer a finish line or a grand destination. It became a path, a rhythm, a way of walking through life where each step mattered not because it brought you closer to someone else's approval, but because the step itself was sacred. One morning, you stood by the window after a night of heavy rain. The clouds had finally broken, and the sky stretched wide and blue. Sunlight glittered across the rooftops like scattered jewels. The air carried the scent of renewal, clean and cool. And as you breathed it in, you whispered to yourself, I have walked through so many nights of darkness, and yet here I am, still alive to see this dawn. That simple thought wrapped itself around your heart like warmth, and in that moment, a smile, small, genuine, unforced, found its way to your lips. You began to live differently after that. More slowly, more attentively. Where once you had raced to keep up with the restless pace of the world, you now allowed yourself to pause. In the mornings, you sipped tea without rushing, noticing how the bitterness faded into sweetness across your tongue. In the afternoons, you sat quietly in the park, watching children run, listening to the wind threading itself through the trees, hearing the leaves whisper secrets to one another. And you realized, peace had never been absent from your life. It had always been here, patient and waiting. It was your pain, your blindness, that had hidden it from you. Inside, the most profound change was this. You no longer needed others to validate you. Once, you had longed for it desperately, the approving glance, the nod of recognition, the whispered well done. Now, you could meet your own eyes in the mirror and say softly, as long as I know I am enough, that's enough. You began to understand that worth is not measured in applause or praise. Worth is measured in honesty, the courage to live aligned with yourself, even when others fail to notice, even when they misunderstand. One evening, you ran into an old friend by chance. They looked at you for a moment, almost startled. You've changed, close quote, they said. You look calmer, more at peace. And you smiled, answering gently, yes, I've learned to forgive, starting with myself. Forgiveness had become one of your greatest teachers. Not forgetting, not erasing, but releasing. You forgave the harsh words that once broke you, the endless comparisons that left you feeling small, the dismissals that told you that you did not belong. Not because they deserved it, many times, they did not. But because you wanted to walk free. You realized that carrying resentment was like walking with stones in your pockets. The farther you tried to go, the heavier the weight became. Releasing it was not for them, it was for you. And so, you forgave. Quietly, steadily. And in forgiving, you discovered a freedom that had nothing to do with erasing scars and everything to do with carrying them lightly. Your growth was not about becoming perfect. It was about becoming whole. It was about seeing yourself, wounds, shadows, laughter, and light, and saying, this is me, and I am enough. Gave you wings. And you, listening now, have you ever felt that kind of freedom? Not the freedom of borders falling away, not the freedom of endless wealth or recognition, but the quiet freedom that rises when you stop living as a mirror for others. The freedom of no longer shaping yourself to win their approval, their applause, their fleeting validation. Instead, you stand in alignment with your own heart, imperfect but true. Forgiveness no longer becomes a gift you give to those who wronged you, it becomes the breath you offer yourself. Because deep down, you deserve lightness more than you deserve bitterness. If you have felt it, you know. This is a form of freedom that no one can grant you and no one can take away. It is not given by family, by success, or by society. It blooms quietly inside, the moment you stop begging for permission to be enough. The months ahead took on a different shape. Where once every day felt like a battle for belonging, now the days stretched open with possibility. You walked with a steadier pace, no longer haunted by invisible eyes. You dared to try things you once avoided, signing up for a class that intimidated you, learning a skill that once whispered failure before you even began. You filled notebooks with your stories, even if no one else would ever read them, because the act of writing was not about applause, it was about truth. You traveled alone, carrying only yourself and the courage you had finally uncovered. Each new street, each unfamiliar face, each quiet morning in a strange cafe, added a missing piece to the puzzle. Slowly, you began to see the fuller picture of who you were becoming, not who others demanded you to be. And yes, the scars remained. Memory does not vanish simply because you choose peace. You still remember the sting of sharp words, the moments of abandonment, the coldness where you had once craved warmth. But now you saw those scars differently. They were not open wounds but healed lines, proof that you had survived. Proof that love, even when imperfect, even when flawed, had taught you something irreplaceable. You understood at last that you cannot change others. You cannot rearrange their hearts, rewrite their choices, or soften their gaze. What you could change was how you received them. And so you stopped letting their words weigh more than your own. You no longer trembled when old voices echoed. Instead, you smiled, kept walking, and trusted that happiness was something built with your own two hands. At a family gathering, the test came again. The same eyes that once cut you down turned toward you, scanning for weakness, for a reaction. But this time, you did not shrink. You joined the conversation with grace. You listened without the urge to defend, without the hunger to prove. And when you left, you carried no heaviness, no invisible burden pressing against your chest. You were no longer the person desperate for their approval. You were simply yourself, whole, steady, free. And in your composure, they saw something new. An unshakable strength, a freedom that asked for no explanation. That night, sitting by the soft light of a lamp, you opened your journal. On the page, you wrote a sentence that summed up all you had lived. Freedom is not the absence of scars. Freedom is the ability to smile while carrying them. And have you ever considered that this is the greatest sign of maturity? Not what you achieve, not the titles or recognition, but the depth with which you accept yourself. To embrace both the light and the shadow, to honor both the victories and the wounds. To look at yourself in the mirror and see not a list of flaws, not a checklist of what still needs fixing, but a person who is enough, right now, as you are. Have you ever asked yourself the question, if tomorrow all recognition disappeared, if every voice fell silent, would I still be enough for myself? Close quote. Growth is when your answer becomes yes. Growth is when you stop searching for perfection in the world outside, and instead, you fall in love with the imperfection within. Because true freedom, the kind that endures, is not found in their applause, it is found in the quiet rhythm of your own heart finally saying, I am enough. One morning, you stepped out after rain and inhaled deeply the scent of earth, fresh and alive. You felt your chest expand, your heart lighten. Though you knew challenges still lay ahead, you also knew you had changed. You were no longer just someone who endured, you were someone who chose. You chose how to live. You chose what to carry. You chose to be real. And in that choice, you found the rarest treasure of all. Freedom. And then, you realized. The journey was never about reaching some grand destination. It was about learning how to walk each day with a quieter heart. You no longer needed to prove yourself to anyone. You no longer searched for approving eyes or waited for praise. Because now you understood your worth was never in what others said. It was in the honesty you carried within your own soul. The wounds of the past still remained, but they had become beautiful scars, proof that you had lived, that you had hurt, and that you had risen again. From them, you learned strength, patience, and forgiveness. And most importantly, you discovered freedom, freedom from judgment, freedom from expectations, freedom to be simply, authentically yourself. You listening now, have you ever paused to ask, who am I really living for? Am I living